Hey everyone, Ken and Profit here. I'm back with another Blender tutorial. In this video, we're going to rig a Luxo lamp, or just a normal desk lamp, Pixar style lamp. This is going to be just some basic mechanical rigging with a few constraints, a few fancy things. So nothing too advanced, but it should get you an idea of how you can put together a few different concepts to create a really cool mechanical rig that looks a lot more complex than it is. As always, you can download the finished rigged asset from my Patreon by becoming a member there. If you want to follow along with just the model that I'm using, I'm going to make that available for free. So link in the description, you can check that out. Also from Patreon, you just don't have to sign up or anything. You'll just be able to download it there. So let's jump into Blender and rig a lamp. All right, so here's our Luxo lamp asset inside of Blender. You can, like I said, download this from Patreon for free. If you want to get the rigged version, then you can join my Patreon and you can get that as well. So we want to do a really simple rigging here. We know we want to rotate it here, here, and here. And then we want an IK switch right here that'll sort of drive the whole thing so that we can animate it with a big mechanical arm. But we also have these springs right here that we'll need to stretch. And that's sort of the fun mechanical part of this, the thing that's going to make it look like a way more complex rig than it really is. So everything else is pretty simple, just rotating joints, but then we're going to do some fun constraints to get these springs and the IK system working together. And you'll notice if you're using my model, of course you can follow along with a model of your own. I've centered the pivots of almost everything, set them right where I want them to be. And I've also separated out the things like the springs. So this is just one asset by itself. I've also, on my asset, I've kind of broken it up into just different collections. And this will make it easier when you're rigging and just weighting parts of your asset to certain bones. If you just name everything and keep everything nice and tidy and organized, it just helps the whole process of rigging to go really smoothly. So without further ado, let's go ahead and press Shift A and we'll add in an armature. And we can just scale this down because it's at the world origin. And we can kind of go to wireframe mode by pressing Z. And I'll tab into edit mode of this armature and just kind of center that up with the base. This doesn't really need to be connected to anything. So I'm just going to press Shift D and duplicate it and rotate it around like this. And I want this to kind of rotate in between these two pins of my lamp here. So I'm going to just sort of line it up. And I'm going to do the same thing, line it up right here. I'll make sure that this is in line with my geometry just by going to top view. There is a little bit of stylization, a little bit of wonk on the asset itself. But again, because this is all mechanical, there's not going to be weight painting. It's just going to be 100% weighting to a bone. It doesn't actually matter if your bone is perfectly lined up with the geometry. What matters more is where those rotation points are. All right, so I'm going to extrude up to this point and then go into wireframe and just extrude out. And this whole top of the lamp is going to be weighted to this right here. So this will bend at this point. And it's perfectly fine, like I said, that this doesn't match up with the geometry. You don't need to do like this or anything like that, because it's just going to be 100% weighted to this bone. And then for our IK bone, I'll just extrude down one like that. And then this is connected. We don't need it to be connected. So I'll press Option P on Mac or Alt P on Windows. And I'm going to clear that bone. And you can disconnect it as well if it's connected, but just a loose bone right there. Okay, and we can go ahead and set up the IK constraint by selecting this bone and shift selecting the bone right in front of it. We press Shift I and that adds an IK constraint to active bone. And now this bone becomes the controller for our IK constraint. And you'll notice that all we did was add a bone constraint to this bone here. So if you select this bone and come over here to your bone properties, make sure you're in pose mode. You'll see here's our bone properties and then here's our bone constraints. So if you select that menu, you see we have an IK constraint added, and we can adjust the chain length. Right now it's set to 0, and you can see if we do 1, 2, that's the number of bones. We really just need it to be 3 bones right there because we don't need it to affect the base. So now our IK master controller grabs those, and we have this really nice, cool mechanical rig, super fast and easy, which is really cool. Okay, now we need to do the spring bones as well. So let's jump back into edit mode and let's just grab this bone right here. I'll press Shift D and just scale it. This isn't parented to anything, so that's good. If it was, you would want to clear that parent, but it's not. So we'll just line it up with our spring right here. We want this to be right at that pin where this spring is going to stretch to, and then this one to be down here at this lower ring where it sort of bends at right there. Same thing with this one. We'll go ahead and Shift D, duplicate this bone and scale it. And I'm going to clear the parent so it's not attached to anything for now, just so we can demonstrate. And we'll do the same thing, line it up with the 2 pins right here, like so. Okay, and so now if we go into pose mode and we just test this out, you'll see that those spring joints stay put, and that's no big deal. We just need to parent them to the rest of the system. So I want this bone to follow this joint right here. So I'll grab this bone, make sure you're in edit mode when you do this, shift select this bone, and we'll press Control P, and we'll do keep offset because you want it to stay at the location it's at right there. And then I'll do the same thing with this bone, grab this one, shift select that bone, Control P, keep offset. And now if we go into pose mode and test out the whole system, you can see those spring bones rotate with the rest of our system, which is great. So now let's do some very simple bone weighting. And Blender makes this really easy. It used to be a lot more complicated, but thankfully it's not anymore. We can just grab whatever objects we want to be weighted to, let's say this bone, for instance, and you can do this all in pose mode. So if I grab my base collection here, which I actually need to, or my base arm collection here. And let me go actually into object mode because I want to separate out this spring and this ring right here because I don't want those to be weighted. So I'll throw these in a collection of their own and I'll call this lower spring. And so now I can just grab everything in my base arm collection, all of these assets right here, shift select my bone system, but go into pose mode. So shift select that bone, press Control P, and just set parent to bone. If we grab our IK constraint bone, you can see that the bottom layer of that system is weighted to that bone. And that's really cool. And we can just work our way up, but I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna grab this spring in object mode and move it to its own middle spring collection, just so I don't get confused with myself. A little bit of maintenance. And so now I can grab all of these objects and shift select this big bone that they're selected to. Again, we have to be in pose mode when we do it. Keep leaving that out. Shift select that bone. Okay, and then press Control P and weight everything to the bone. So they all get 100% weighting on that bone. And now they maintain the pivot point from the bone system. So everything still rotates around provided you have all your pivots set correctly. So that's really, really cool. We just need to grab our top layer, the lamp head objects. That's going to include the light bulb and everything. Shift select this bone and we'll press Control P, parent to bone. And now that allows us to move the top of the lamp as well. You can get that nice Pixar animation. Woohoo! Now obviously our springs aren't moving and we want to address that. So let's grab this bone or this spring right here and shift select this bone that it's going to be parented to. And we'll just go ahead and weight that and do the same thing with this middle spring. Grab this and make sure you grab the actual bone you want it to be weighted to. Control P and weight it to that bone. And now you'll notice the middle one, it's actually not too bad. You might be able to get away with that. But this lower one is completely, it just totally breaks. And that's no good. So how do we fix that? There's several ways, but a couple ways I found that are really useful is just to use some fancy constraints. And they're not even that fancy. So we have this ring right here that we want this spring to sort of stay locked to. And then we know that this pin up here, we want it to sort of stay stretched to. So we can use those in our constraint system. So let's grab this bone, and remember we already have this spring weighted to it. So we can go ahead and come here to bone constraints. By the way, once you have all your bones sort of set and you know what direction they're facing, I like to change them to be sticks in the viewport display. It just makes them a little bit easier to see. So over here in the viewport settings of your bone, just change it right here to stick. And if you hold down Option or Alt while you do it with all your bones selected, so press A, select all your bones, come down here, hold down Option, Alt, it'll change all of them to stick. And now you can view it a lot clearer in your viewport. Okay, so let's grab this bone and then back into our bone constraints. We're gonna add a copy location constraint, and we can just choose this pin object right here. And it'll snap to the location of that pin. And so if you need to change the location of the pin, of course you can move the pin itself, or you can just adjust the pivot point of the pin. So if you need it up higher, like right here, you could move the pivot point by saying, set origin to 3D cursor, and then there that moves that spring back up because it's copying the location of this pin now. It's staying tracked to that object. So now if you go into your pose system, that spring still rotates, it still bends, but it's copying the location of the pin, and so it's staying tracked there. But obviously it's slipping away from these rings up here that we want it to stay tracked to. So how do we fix that? Well, I'm glad you asked. We can now add one of my favorite constraints, a stretch to constraint. And that says, what do we want this bone to, you guessed it, stretch to? And we can have it stretch to these upper pins right there. So now it's copying the location of this lower pin and then stretching to the location of this upper pin. And that allows you to expand and contract, which is really, really cool. So we just get such a natural spring. You can see this nice contracting and expanding, stretching way out, just like an actual spring would. And yeah, there's some deformation in there. So if you want it to really get perfect, you might want to adjust the pivot point. You can do things like in the volume of the stretch to constraint, you can adjust the volume variation right there. You can adjust the original length. But for the most part, it works really well just straight out of the can, and you get that nice complex mechanical look. So now let's go ahead and do the same thing for this one. Even though there's not quite as much distortion, we can still clean this up a bit. So let's add a copy location, and this time let's grab this pin right here because we can have it sort of rotate around this screw pivot right here, this screw pivot mid. So if I grab the location of that, and now we need that stretch to constraint. And we can grab this screw up here. Now it's going to stretch to the location of that screw. Alrighty. And if we did everything correctly, you should see a little bit of compression and stretching in both screws now. And it's going to be more evident the more extreme animation you do with your object. But now what's great about using those screws instead of the actual rings is now with that middle one, you can see the rotation around the actual screw that we have right there. And it works in a really nice mechanical way. Now, how do we finish this out to make a nice professional looking rig? We want to, of course, make some controls, and we also want to make a master location control for this. So let's go ahead and first of all make some curve objects that'll be used for our viewport display for our bones. So I'm going to press Shift A, add in a curve, and we'll just do a circle curve. And I'll go ahead and press Shift H, hide everything but that curve. So now we have a circle, and I'm going to throw this in a new collection called Controls. And this one will just be circle, really original. Go ahead and Shift D, duplicate that circle, and let's see, I'll scale this one out a little bit. And what we can do here is go ahead and subdivide this a couple of times. Let's subdivide one more time. And let's see, let's go ahead and grab sort of the middle points here of all of these segments and scale in like so. And you can go ahead and press V and set that to vector for this whole thing. It's a nice sharp gear. Now we have a sort of a gear control right there. Let's do one more. Let's make just a cube. So we'll grab a mesh object, and I'll press X and delete only faces. Now we have just the edges, and we can go object, convert to curve, and now we have a curve cube. Okay, You can make way more complex controls if you want. I'm going to throw that into my control group. So I'll go ahead and hide that whole collection. In fact, I don't need it to render either. And I'll press Alt-H, bring everything else back. And now we can set up a nice looking rig if we go into pose mode. So for instance, if we want this bone to have the gear icon, we could come over here to the bone display, and underneath custom shapes, we could choose our gear. And it's not going to be rotated the correct direction, but that's no problem. We can just rotate it on the y-axis by 90 degrees. And if you want to scale it up, get a nice little gear icon going right there. And now, you can rotate like that. And you could do the same with any of these other objects. Maybe for the IK constraint, you want this to be the cube. And I might, what I did for my final rig was kind of scale it up and then make it more of just a box here. And then lower it down like that. Just so it looks more like a control. Maybe globally scale it down a little bit. Just so it looks more like a control you would grab for an IK system. There's no rules here. You can do whatever you want with your display. But let's go ahead and finish this out. So I'll add a custom shape here for this bone. I'll have this be a gear as well. And rotate that by 90 degrees and scale this one down. And then this bone, I'll have this be a circle. And this will be sort of the master location control for the entire object. But you'll notice if we move that, it doesn't move anything. So we need to connect this bone to the rest of our system. You really just need to grab this bone right here, shift select your master control bone, Control P, and make sure you do keep offset. And now if you go into pose mode, you should be able to grab that control and move it, but the base isn't weighted to it. That's the only problem. So no problem. Grab those base objects, shift select that bone, Control P. Make sure you're in pose mode, Control P. Now it's weighted, the base of your object is weighted to that bone. And now if you move this around, oh, we left the pin behind. Those darn little rings. Okay, so grab these rings as well. Shift select your bone, make sure you're in pose mode, Control P, parent those rings as well to that bone. And now with this selected, you can move it around and it has the reverse of your IK system. And this moves independently as well. Now what happens if you want to be able to rotate the whole system like normal using this joint or this joint, and you're not able to because you have just the IK system going? Well, if you want a way to turn off the IK constraint, if you grab the bone that has the IK constraint, which is this one right here, you have this influence value, which is great. It's 0 to 1 underneath the constraints. And if you turn that off, this just operates like a standard bone. And you can just, animate the old-fashioned manual way. So we can create a nice little control on our system that allows us to turn the influence of this off. And maybe we want to do it on the actual IK system itself here. So the way to do that is if you grab this bone, you can come here to the bone properties and underneath custom properties, create a new property. You can see it'll show up as prop, and where that is displayed is underneath the item of the bone in the side panel. So you can see underneath properties that just showed up here. And what you can do is rename that to whatever you want and it'll change right there. So this is just a nothing burger right now, but if we make this be our influence for our IK constraint system, so if we do IK FK like so, we could leave it on a float object, or you could make it be a Boolean, which would just be a tick box. The float is fine because our IK value in our constraint is a float. So we can press OK, and now we have a 0 to 1 value for IK to FK. And right now, it's not driving anything, but if you want this to drive, let's see, the IK influence value of this bone, what you could do is on this value, right click and copy as new driver. Blender makes this so easy and I love it. So now with that copied, select your bone that has the IK constraint system, and under here, under influence, this value right here, you can just do paste driver. And so now this value will be, as long as it's the same, so this was set to 1 and we had this set to 1, this will drive the value of this object now. So if you take this down to 0, you'll notice in the properties panel that goes to 0. So now this bone doesn't do anything. It's not operating as an IK constraint. So now you have an influence of how much IK, FK. You can set it all the way to 1, you can turn it all the way off, and now these become like normal controls at that point. So there's a lot of really fun things you can do when you're creating kind of a final production level rig. A lot of neat tricks you could do. You could create a custom property to hide these bones if you wanted to do that. In my final rig, I created a button that turns the subdivision surface on or off of the entire object. You might consider doing things like that. But for the purposes of this tutorial not getting too long, we can go ahead and just end it there. Hopefully this gives you an idea of just what exactly is possible with mechanical rigging. So again, if you want to download my finished rig, you can check out my Patreon. All my assets from all my tutorials are available. As often as possible, I make them available to my Patreon members. If you want just the practice model to go ahead and practice on, then go ahead and grab that. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. I'll see you next time.